Hello, today is Wednesday, April 15th, 2015, and I am your host, Sue Brown, and welcome to Info2Rail, your freight train to modern media. How are you all doing today? I want to take a second to tell you a little bit about this weather going on here. I'm telling you, I'm in upstate New York, and 2 days ago it was 80 degrees, and then that night it was 40 degrees. Yesterday it was 65 degrees. Last night was 35 degrees. I mean, this drop in weather is absolutely insane. 1 minute you're nice and toasty warm, and the next minute you're ready for a parka again. I don't know what's going on with this weather, but I do know that they're spraying like crazy. If you guys get the chance, and you should take the chance often to look up, you'll see all the chemtrails in the sky. So we're not controlling anything anymore. They're controlling our weather. We have a great show in store for you today. We are very excited and very fortunate to have back L.A Marzulli with us once again to talk about his books on the trail of the Nephilim 1 and 2. First, we're going to take a little glimpse into the news. Lehu, Hawaii. According to the Yahoo News, a museum in Hawaii is preparing to open a treasure trove of artifacts from the shipwreck of a royal yacht sunk off the coast of Kauai 191 years ago. Richard Rogers, a Hawaii shipwreck chaser, worked with scientists from the Smithsonian Institution to dredge up the findings from the ship owned by King Kamehameha II. Sorry, that's a long one. AKA Leho, the second king of Hawaii. We found gold, silver, Hawaiian poi pounders, gemstones, a boat whistle, knives, forks, mica, things from all over the world, high and low-end European stuff. That is fascinating. That's the stuff I'd love to do too. Every bit of it's royal treasure, Rogers said. Rogers volunteers his time aboard his research vessel, the Pilialoha, over a 5-year period in 4-week intervals from 1995 to 2001 to pull up the treasures. It's all pickled and nice and ready to be displayed, Rogers said. There are over 1,000 artifacts. We did our homework, and this find is valuable because it belonged to the king. It's a fabulous window into the 1820s, Rogers said. The king's belongings were buried in 10 feet of water and 10 feet of sand. His favorite discovery was a trumpet shell. I found it under a bunch of sand and carried it to the deck. This was in 1999. I blew it and it made the most beautiful sound going over the Hananele Bay, Rogers recalled. I thought about how it hadn't been blown for over 170 years. That is fascinating. I think that is something, so, you know, there are very few lucky people in this world who get the chance to go out and uncover this ancient artifact stuff that's been there for so many years. You know, a lot of people don't realize our history and what is buried out there. And it's just fascinating to me. I'd love to be out in there in that setting and digging up new things. Like, I would have loved to have dug up the Titanic and had the opportunity to see what was on the Titanic of those people, you know, and digging up these treasures from past kings and such. To me, that is amazing. And you know what? That brings us to our guest today, L.A Marzulli. He's out there and he's finding these elongated skulls and all this amazing stuff. And he is a lucky man. We're going to go to a short break right now. And when we return, we will have L.A Marzulli with us. Stay tuned. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back with author, researcher, lecturer, and filmmaker L.A Marzulli, author of such books as Cosmic Chess Match and On the Trail of the Nephilims, Book 1 and 2. In addition, L.A. has to his credit multiple films like the Watchers series, with his newest edition, Watchers 8. Welcome back, L.A., and thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
I read your books, and I'll tell you, they were absolutely fascinating. I could not put them down from the moment I picked them up. It was...
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about the hair that you found and the samples taken and what your results were?
Well, we talked about specifically on the trail of a Nephilim 2. And of course, what you're referring to is the Raman spectroscopy, which we did in a lab with a scientist by the name of Stephen Colburn. What was interesting about this is Senior Wam, who's the curator of the Paracas Museum in Paracas, Peru, allowed us to take a few of the strands of the reddish hair from one of the mummies, which had fallen off in the display case. So we had a couple of hairs that had fallen off from a display case, and we put them in an envelope, and we, got them back to the States, and we gave them to this guy, Stephen Colburn, who did a test on them. And what was interesting here is we had 4 hairs that we used. We used and of course, all this is illustrated and written in On the Trail of a Nephilim, Volume 2. And we had the red hair from the mummy from Paracas. We had a control sample, which was a human hair, actually from Stephen. And then we had a dyed human hair. And then we had something which is really bizarre. The 4th hair was a platinum blondish, a whitish hair from a man who had been forced to have sex with a hybrid being. Now that's really strange stuff, and we get that. But he had this, the man who had been taken and had coitus with this hybrid being, this female, awakened the next morning and found, I assume, several of these hairs on his person, and he had the presence of mind to take them and collect them and keep them. So this came into Stephen Colburn's possession. And what was interesting is when he did the Raman spectroscopy examination of the hairs, and he plotted it on a graph, the human hair just shows a nice little arc. The dyed human hair goes through the top of the graph. And this is where it gets interesting. The platinum blonde human hair, or the platinum blonde hybrid hair, and the red hair from Paracas, the slopes of their graphs are almost identical. And when we saw that, we realized that there was a correlation, a molecular correlation between the two. What's interesting here is the mummy hair is approximately 2,000 years old. The hybrid hair, the blondish, whitish hybrid hair, is in modernity, maybe 10 years old at the most. And so we were blown away by the results when plotted on a graph, the similarity between these two. So what does that prove? Well, it seems to show that there's a link between the two. That's what it seems to show. And that points back to my hypothesis that there's an outside agency manipulating the genome and has been doing so literally for millennia. And of course, you can't hang your hat on that, and you can't say that it's conclusive. It's just one experiment with a couple of strands of hair. It'd be great to do multiple experiments with the Raman at different labs across the United States, sort of a blind study, not telling them what they were looking at, and see if it could be duplicated, and see if what they would come up with. But at least it's a start for us, and we were sort of taken aback by what we saw, specifically the results and when we compared the red hair from Paracas, which was 2,000 years old, to the hybrid hair from modernity. We were really taken aback by that.
I took quite a while studying the information that you had in the book about that, and it was just very fascinating.
Sure.
You in the Trail of the Nephilim 2, you had an amazing conversation with a Navajo woman, and you referred to her as a Navajo elder. Can you share that with us?
I'd love to. This was a great conversation, and again, when you sit down, you talk to Native Americans. A lot of times they're very reticent to even say anything to the white man, and I understand why. I mean, the genocide that was practiced in the 19th century against many of the tribes is just really unforgivable. And in many of these states, there's never been any formal apology. What is interesting is that the legislature in Kentucky wrote a formal proclamation talking about Betrayal of Tears and basically the genocide that happened to the Native Americans. So it's always interesting to talk to Native American people, and sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes as with this woman and her husband, they were more than willing to talk to me about Yaitza, and that's the giants that were in Milan, in New Mexico, at the Navajo tribe. And these oral traditions were passed down from grandfather to grandson, grandmother to granddaughter, that type of thing. It's an oral tradition and it's passed down. But there's also the petroglyphs, and we show one of the petroglyphs in On the Trail Volume 2, which is just incredible, and it shows what we would call a Native American going up against a very large man, very large man. We also see six-fingered giants in the petroglyphs, or six-fingered hands, which are, part of a giant in many of the petroglyphs. So it's absolutely fascinating to see all this and hear it all from a Native American elderist. So we were sitting down and we were talking, and her husband chimed in, and basically all of a sudden, with the grandparents and where all this came from, we're back around 1870, literally, with the great-grandmothers and the great-grandfathers. We're back around 1870 when all this oral tradition, and that's how far they could trace it back. And of course, it goes back further. But what they talk about are red-haired cannibalistic giants that roamed the land, and that their ancestors had to clear the land of these giants. And what's interesting also is and I haven't written about this yet, but I interviewed a Paiute woman, very high up in her tribe, who said exactly the same thing about the red-haired giants around the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. And that's why we were out there, to go to the cave, see the cave. I've actually have a book written, I think, in let me just take it out here. Not that it matters to your audience, but it always matters to me. Lovelock Cave. This is a wonderful little book, which cost me about $100 to get. And it was from an archaeologist who was actually out in the Lovelock Cave in Nevada and did a dig in there. And let me get my glasses on because I can't see doodly squat without them when I'm trying to read it and whatever. 1929, this was compiled. And it's just a really fascinating book, and it talks about the cannibalistic giants and what was found in the cave, and some of the mummified remains and the red hair. All of it's in this book. So and the reason why I got it is what it does is it begins to validate the oral tradition that we hear from these Native American elders, both male and female. And so she was telling me about the red-haired giants out at Lovelock Cave and what happened, and how they would take their children and eat them. And that's just, of course, that's cannibalistic. And the reason why we're interested in is because we understand from the Book of Enoch that this is one of the traits of the Nephilim. That's hence the title of the book, On the Trail of the Nephilim. That one of the traits of the Nephilim was cannibalism. And we get that from the Book of Enoch. And isn't it interesting that these red-haired giants that seem to show up out of nowhere are, in fact, cannibalistic? Is that coincidence? I don't think so. So, all very interesting stuff.
It definitely was. I very much enjoyed that story in the book a lot. Can you share with us the Nephilim lance, what that is?
I'd love to. Absolutely. The Nephilim lance was, and we call it that. We really don't know what it is at this point, unfortunately, but we're still calling it a Nephilim lance. And of course, more testing needs to be done on it. But with the Nephilim lance, it was found by this man by the name of Bob Shelley. Bob and Ann Shelley, they're a married couple, obviously. And so Bob's out hiking in the wilderness of Michigan, and he comes on this artifact that's just laying at this abandoned campsite. And he's not sure what it is. And at first he decides, well, maybe I won't take it. But then he decides to take it. So he packs out with this thing, and it's about 8.5 pounds. And, that's a lot of extra weight to put in your pack and to, schlep a 10-mile hike or whatever. But he decides to do it, and he brings it to the Nephilim Mounds 2 conference, where I was there with Chief Joseph Riverwood. By the way, the Nephilim Mounds 3 conference is coming up in September. It'll be in Ohio. The website, I think, is up and running. Google Nephilim Mounds 3. Chief Joseph Riverwind will be speaking there, Russ Dizdar, myself, and of course a special appearance by Fritz Zimmerman. But Chief Joseph, who's a Taino war chief, was with me at the Nephilim Mounds too. And I introduced him to Russ, and it was just great. So anyway, at one of the breaks, Bob Shelley brings the artifact out and shows us, lays it on the table, and we're gathered around it, Chief Joseph and myself and Bob Shelley. And I'm, Bob thinks it's a sword, I think it's a sword, and we're just going, well, what is this? And Chief Joseph goes, no, you're looking at it through your cultural eyes. It's a lance. And this ties into the oral traditions of Native Americans that talk about these red-haired giants with these very long lances, which would basically go through 3 different people. And we have a picture of that. We've got the metal analyzed. It was found to be almost 100% copper. It's a bronze a bronze artifact, but it's almost pure copper. And of course, that ties into the copper mines up in Michigan, which is pure copper. I mean, there are a lot of these open copper mines up and around Lake Michigan. Some of the purest copper on the planet is found there. And the tin would have come from England, and that makes bronze. So we've tested it, but it's very inconclusive. I've had weapon experts look at it. Very inconclusive. Some people are quick to say, "Oh, it's made in modernity." They're having fun pounding a copper bar. Others aren't so sure. We're not sure. We still don't know what it is, and that's sort of maddening to us. The fact that the weapon or the blade, this lance, has a patina on it. More scientific study needs to be done on it, and unfortunately, we're sort of at an end with that. I spent close to $3,000 on getting it tested at a very sophisticated laboratory, but the results were extremely inconclusive, and we thought we might be able to get carbon-14 or at least be able to estimate the age of the lance, and we were led to believe that was going to happen, and then when we got the results, we didn't get that, so that was sort of frustrating. But yeah, the lance is very, very interesting.
I looked at the picture of it, and that was very, very large. It was very long, that lance was. It was amazing. I love that stuff. I love the chase of it.
It's inconclusive, but it's pointing to the veracity of Native American tradition that these giants were in the land, and then you combine it with other artifacts that we have in On the Trail 1 and On the Trail 2, and of course the pictures which I found in Catalina Island, and it starts to add up, and that's what's exciting in my opinion.
I have a question. I had Greg Little on my show not too long ago, and he was talking about Atlantis. And I wondered if you thought that Atlantis had anything to tie in with the Bible in any way.
Well, it's interesting, the idea that this civilization was there, and Plato talks about Atlantis, and could that island have been, let's say, Nephilim Central, or could the idea that all the continents were at one time linked together. And then we read in the Genesis account, and in those days, the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. Is that when the continents were pulled apart? Remember, most people put God in this little box, and well, even though I guess he maybe created the universe, but nah, he doesn't have any power to do anything. Are you kidding me? What if the continents were actually pulled apart in the days of Peleg and separated, and the nations scattered over the face of the earth, just as the biblical account tells us? That's science fiction. I get it. It's science fiction, but the supernatural is beyond science fiction, and that's the kind of stuff that we read about all through the biblical narrative. When the supernatural interfaces with humankind, it's often incredibly bizarre. I mean, look, just the idea of the Red Sea, the waters standing up as a heap, and the people go through on dry land. I mean, it said the waters on both sides stood up like a heap. And, the skeptics look at this and try to say, well, they were further upstream, there was a landslide and that dammed up the water. But that's not what the narrative tells us. The narrative said the water stood on both sides like a heap. It was a wall. of water, which was just frozen there. And the people, walked through on dry land. I mean, that's the biblical narrative, which paints a completely different picture than modern day skeptics will try to twist our arms and, our intellectual arms, as it were, and tell us, oh, no, there was no supernatural. This is how it happened. Well, no, I'm a frank supernaturalist. And when it says the waters stood up as a heap, I have no problem with that. That's the whole point. We're dealing with the supernatural. When Moses throws his staff down and it becomes a serpent, right? That's a supernatural feat. But the magicians who were in Pharaoh's court do exactly the same thing. They throw down their staffs, and their staffs become serpents. So this was something that was practiced. In other words, there's an entire occult paradigm alive and well and thriving when Moses and Aaron show up. I mean, they're the high priest of Egypt, and this occult paradigm was worldwide. So the idea of Atlantis, it's a possibility. We've never found really any evidence of that. I mean, Edgar Cayce was a sleeping prophet. And again, that's an occult. He basically was an occult medium is what he was. He was a trance medium. And we're told in Deuteronomy that that's forbidden because the entity that you're taking in is not a benevolent one. It's a malevolent one. That's a 3-hour conversation. But the bottom line is Edgar Cayce talked about the Bimini Wall being found that was part of Atlantis. And that was found, at least part of it, but it didn't go to anywhere. And we've never found any artifacts that would talk about Atlantis. And frankly, all we have is the writings of Plato, which talk about Atlantis outside the Pillar of Hercules, which, of course, at the end of the Mediterranean Sea. We know that. So it's all very interesting, a lot of speculation. Things like Atlantis, I just keep on the back burner. One never knows. Again, Plato did write about it, so it seems to have at least a thread of veracity there. But that's all we have about it. And other than that, it's a lot of speculation. A lot of people who will channel entities will talk about Atlantis. But any information that is channeled through an entity cannot be trusted, in my opinion.
Well, I had wondered, just from all that I have learned about Atlantis, I had wondered if it had something to do with the Nephilim in some way, back in the biblical days. So that's why I asked. Can you tell us about your exciting adventure flying the airplane?
Well, when I flew out to Catalina, or when I was going to go out to Catalina to look at the Ralph Glidden records at the Catalina Museum. By the way, I'll give them a quick plug. They are getting ready to open up the new museum on Catalina, and that's going to be fantastic when that happens. But when I contacted John Borgina, the former curator of the museum, I wanted to fly out. I didn't want to take the boat where all the tourists are on, although that's a fun trip too, and just recently did so last week, actually. But I wanted to fly out because I wanted to get a feel for what Catalina looked like in the air. I wanted to circle the island and look at it, and then, of course, drive through the interior that Ralph Glidden had access to. Most normal, or most people don't have access to the interior. It's all under the control of the Conservancy, which holds ownership of great swaths of Catalina. So the general public can't wander around in the interior. Everything's controlled. Isn't that interesting? But Glidden performed primitive archaeological digs, and I mean very primitive, in the 20s when he was employed by the High Museum. Well, the High Museum was later gobbled up by the Smithsonian, and he exhumed hundreds of Native American skeletons, but along with them in other graves, he found other artifacts which seemed to point to a giant race of human beings. And of course, we found pictures on Catalina Island, which are in the book, On the Trail 2. We've had them analyzed, and we seem to have discovered 2 skeletons which are upwards of 9 feet. And of course, that's not normal. But I chartered this airplane from a gentleman, Terry Johnston, who's a brother of a friend of mine, and it was a flight instructor. So I drive down the Hawthorne, and I figure, well, it's a 2-seater Cessna, and he'll fly me out there. That's going to be really cool. I'll get some aerial shots of the island, and that's why I was doing it. And all this is in the book. But Terry surprises me, and he goes, well, you're going to taxi the plane. I go, what? and there's two sets of controls in the Cessna, so identical controls. So he shows me how to work the pedals, and I put down the throttle a little bit, and I taxi the plane. And at first I'm all over the place, and I sort of get the hang of it, and I taxi to the end of the runway, and he takes the plane off, and then about 10 minutes into the flight, he goes, "Okay, take the stick." What? And so here I am flying this plane with a flight instructor, of course, and he shows me how to, keep the nose up and stay at the same altitude and keep the wings level. And I make a few turns, and it's just fantastic. And we get to Catalina, he lands the plane. I go about my business. The following day, Terry picks me up. I spent 10 hours in the archives, which is why I flew out there, and all this is, of course, is recorded in On the Trail of Nephilim Volume 2. And we're at the airport, and Terry goes, "Okay, you're gonna take off." I go, "What?" And Catalina Airport, at the end of the runway, it's 500 feet down. I mean, if you're not airborne, you crash. That's what it is. So he tells me, "This is what we're gonna do. Taxi the plane down to the end of the runway, and then we're gonna get everything checked with the tower. Then we're gonna take off." Okay. At the end of the runway, we jam the throttle down the plane. He says, keep the nose straight ahead and just let it go, and you'll feel it, and just pull back on the stick, and get the nose up, and off you go. So we jam the throttle, and it's the plane starts bouncing down the runway, rolling down the runway, and the engine's roaring, and it's just really cool. It's like a big go-kart, And so for me, it was just like being a little kid, and we're bouncing a couple of times, and I sort of ease back on the stick, and we're airborne, and I'm flying the plane. You got to be kidding me. And I take it up, and he's watching me and telling me what to do and guide me through it, and I bank a little bit, and we're up at altitude, about 3,000 feet up, 2,000 feet up, and I bank slightly, and we're over the water and looking at Avalon, and it's just absolutely incredible. And I flew. Took off in the plane and basically flew all the way back to Los Angeles. So I logged almost 30 minutes of flight time, which is really exciting. So he landed the plane, and that's how all that happened. But it was a blast.
I had fun reading that. That's what I could imagine, you having fun like a little kid.
I was. It was just like being, 10 years old, your first go-kart ride, It was really cool.
I want to go to the Trail of the Nephilim 1. I was wondering if you could tell us about America's Stonehenge.
I'd love to. In fact, we'll be visiting there in May. There's a conference in Calvary Chapel, Kennebec, in Maine. Let me just, since I'm giving it a plug, I might as well just go there and tell you exactly what the date. I think it's the weekend of the 3rd, not sure. Let me just get there real quick. I'm almost there now. Yeah, we're going to be in Kennebec, and that is May 1st to the 3rd, Calvary Chapel, Kennebec, Maine. And there's a blog link, or there's a website link on my blog, LAMarzulli.wordpress.com, LAMarzulli.wordpress.com. We'll be in Kennebec, Maine, May 1st to the 3rd. And then, of course, what we're doing is we're driving down to see America's Stonehenge. It's called that because it's similar to the Stonehenge found in the UK. Now, it doesn't have megalithic structures like the one in UK, but it's a henge. A henge is a circle, and there are standing stones outside that circle, which correspond to both the summer and winter solstices and the spring and fall equinoxes, as well as lunar rises and short moon, long moon, all this kind of stuff. All these standing stones are out on the outside of the henge, which correspond to different astronomical events, like I just indicated, summer, winter solstice. So Kelsey Stone is a college student, and he's also on the internet, and he's wondering, well, what happens if I extend the line from the center of the henge? And by the way, this henge is found in New Hampshire. It's about an hour and a half from where we'll be staying in Maine. It's not that far of a drive. I can't wait to see it. And so we draw the line from the center of his henge out to the summer standing stone, which corresponds to the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. And he continues that line and goes further and further and further. And to his astonishment, and of course mine, he winds up intersecting the center trilithon in Stonehenge, England. And you can't do that. That's not a coincidence, in my opinion. It is deliberate. The only way you can do that is you got to triangulate it from the air. And of course, this site has been carbon dated to be about 4,000 years old. None of this existed in antiquity. Who is the prince of the power of the air? And why is it there? And of course, they found remains of human sacrifice. I believe they found remains of human sacrifice on this very large slab, which was used as an altar. It traces back to the Phoenicians, because this line, when it extends from the Stonehenge in New Hampshire, it bisects the center trilithon in Stonehenge, England. But when Kelsey continued the line, he wound up in Beirut, Lebanon. And Beirut, Lebanon is the home of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were descendants of the Canaanites. The Canaanites, in my opinion, were a Nephilim tribe found in the Levant, or the Promised Land. We extended the line further, and I'm a trail of a Nephilim too. And we found some interesting statistics. We don't know what it means. Basically, it's 47 and a half miles. That line is 47 and a half miles from Baalbek, Lebanon, and 47 and a half miles from Gilgal Raphaim in northern Israel. Gilgal Raphaim is a Nephilim tribe, specifically denoted as such. So it's very, very interesting. All this connects, and of course, in my opinion, it is part of the grid system. It's part of the system that the prince of the power of the air, the fallen cherub, used in antiquity. He's abandoned that, and now he's got the World Wide Web, the satellites, which are overhead constantly, which link everything together. So interesting stuff, and there you go.
All right. In Chapter 5 on the Trail 1, you talked about the Smithsonian cover-up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The Smithsonian Institute, we get this from numerous newspaper articles from the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. And it tells us that the bones of giants were found, some with double rows of teeth, very large skulls. Men of letters, doctors would examine these skeletons and put them well over 9 feet, or even 12 feet in some cases. But, you know, the average range of over 7 feet to, let's say, 10 feet, somewhere in that range. And these bones were collected by the Smithsonian. Article after article tells us that the Smithsonian sent teams out, came out and collected the artifacts, and were never seen again. They went into the black hole, which is the Smithsonian Institute. In fact, we're trying to file a Freedom of Information Act to find out what happened to some of these. And I have an open dialogue with an attorney that we're going to be doing that very shortly. But it's interesting that if it was just 1 or 2 newspaper articles that stated this, well, okay, that's interesting, but there's numerous articles that state it. In fact, we know that the Smithsonian actually sent out teams to collect the artifacts. Why? Because these artifacts go against the Darwinian paradigm. They show us that there was another race before the Native Americans that were here, the mound builders, who are erroneously called the Hopo or the Adena. These are names given to them by the white man and the anthropologists and archaeologists at the turn of the last century. No one knows who these people were. No one knows who actually constructed the mounds and why the mounds were constructed to begin with. No one really knows who created Cahokia, the largest earth mound in North America, and on it goes. But we do know that as settlers began to probe into these mounds, giant skeletons, sometimes with copper armor, were found. Giant axe heads were found, spearheads, like we talked about with the Nephilim lance. So, you know, copper ornaments, Native Americans worked in copper, but not ornamentally, not like copper armor. They didn't do that, with all due respect to Native Americans. And of course, Chief Joseph has backed us up on this. So it's all very fascinating and very interesting. We are attempting to, you see, in Ohio, archaeologists can go in on private property and basically dig without a permit. Now, if they find human remains, they've got to notify the local Native American tribe, which they will do. And we've got several sites that we're actually looking at right now. One site, actually two sites that we're digging in, and all this is legal because it's all on private property, and we're digging with an archaeologist, and we found some interesting artifacts. Nothing earth-shattering yet, but we hope to uncover at some point some very large people, if you want to call them people. And of course, when we do, we'll notify NAGPRA, and Chief Joseph will be our representative there. Chief Joseph will fly him in to act as liaison, because we feel that these are not Native American. Therefore, they're not under the jurisdiction of NAGPRA, Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. They don't fall under that category. And DNA evidence and collecting DNA from these specimens will be able to ascertain or at least point to who these people were, if I can even call them people. So a little bit about the mounds and the archaeology and what we're up to.
All right. I want to go to chapter 11 on the Trail 2. Can you tell us about your return to Peru?
Oh, I'd love to. The return to Peru, of course, anytime I go there, there's so much to learn. There's so much to see, so many different sites that I have not yet seen, lots of artifacts. And we actually have a Nephilim skull tour there last May, which was a blast. Brian Forrester and I headed that up. We had 10 people. It was small, but it was really intimate and just wonderful. And we gleaned a lot and learned a lot on that tour and saw a lot of very interesting artifacts. Senior Juan, who is the curator of the Paracas History Museum, allowed us to go in and let me back up. The Huacaros are Spanish for grave robbers, and the Huacaros go into different graves in Peru, and these tombs, which are thousands of years old, and they raid the tombs. And they bring some of the artifacts to Senior Juan, and Senior Juan buys them and then displays them in his museum. 3 such artifacts were there. These were 3 skulls, mummy skulls, from a grave in the Chongos necropolis, which is about a 45-minute drive from Paracas. And this is a very ancient graveyard, thousands of years old. It has been plundered since Columbian times forward. So for the last 500 years, this site has been plundered. And when you walk through Chongos, you see bits of pottery, and there's bones and mummy wrappings and artifacts like Wari slingshots, which are 1,000 years old, and on it goes. It's just an incredible, bizarre place to visit. But the winds that blow will blow the sand over areas. And so when you go back 6 months later, it's different. It's different every time I go there. And I've been to Chongos, I think, 4 times now. But these skulls that were in Senior Juan's museum had been bought. Senior Juan purchased them from a Huacaro, and one of them was an elongated skull, more than likely from a very small child, probably under 2 years old. At least that's what we estimated it at. And Senior Juan allowed us on this last trip to unwrap the baby mummy skull, which is what we did, which was astounding. And what we discovered, and there's a full picture in there of it, Senior Juan's holding it out in the sunlight minutes after we had unwrapped it, which took about 4 or 5 hours. And Joe Taylor and Harry Judkins, who was our archaeologist on that trip, and Joe Taylor is the curator of the Mount Blanco Museum, meticulously unwrapped the wrappings. And we were astounded by what we saw because this skull was elongated and it had yellowish strawberry blonde hair. Very fine, did not look anything like Native American hair, and we're hoping to get hair samples out so we can analyze those. That's one of the things that we're trying to do. But the hair was strawberry blonde. We were completely taken aback by what we saw. Those photographs are in the book, and this is what being on the trail is about. This is what spending the time in the field is about. It's the only way you can do it is to get out there and do your own research, and of course that's what we're trying to do.
And when you went to the Reich Museum, it fascinated me that you found a mummy with tattoos. Can you tell us about that? That was like so fascinating.
Well, this is the Reich Museum. Maria Reich was responsible for putting the Nazca lines on the map. She's the one that protected them. She insisted on protecting them and guarding them, and she's erected a tower by the Pan American Highway. So people can climb up, I think it's 40, 50 feet in the air, and they can look at several of the lines. I've been to Nazca now twice. I've flown over them once. It's just fascinating. It begs the question, why get up on a Monday morning and do this? Who were these people and why are we doing it? Brian Forrester believes that the Paracas people may have been the first people to do many of the glyphs. Now, there are many different theories as to who and were the, why they were doing the lines and who were responsible from them. I do not believe in any way that the von Daniken ancient alien position that these were glyphs pointing to ancient landing pads. I don't believe that for a minute. But these glyphs that are all through the Nazca, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, all these are very complex and really can only be appreciated from the air. You really get the full effect from the air. But guess what? In the Maria Reich Tower, which you're 40, 50 feet above the desert floor there, you can see the glyphs fine. So this begs the question, were towers erected in antiquity which enabled these people to create these glyphs? And the short answer to that is, yeah, they could have erected a 50-foot tower with ease. I mean, absolutely, that can be done all day long in antiquity. So it takes some of the supernatural element out of it. But then you get these lines that extend for miles, and they seem to be perfectly straight. Why do that? Who's doing that? And many of the glyphs are never seen by the public because they go way, way back in the Nazca Plain. So Maria Reich lived there, dedicated her life to protecting the lines, and of course she uncovered mummies and other artifacts. Whoop, let me throw that out of here. Sorry about that. Give me a second. And she protected the lines, and her house became a museum after her death. And so, of course, we toured the museum, and there was a mummy from Nazca, which had a series of tattoos on her arms. There are a lot of artifacts found in and around Nazca, culture on culture. In other words, let's say if the Paracas people were the first people, and then other cultures came up after them, for instance, the Wari, and then finally, let's say the Inca were there, and we see the wells put in by the Inca. It's just absolutely fascinating. So you get these overlapping cultures, each with their own, cultural taboos and cultural practices, and tattooing seemed to be very big. And I don't know what those symbols on the arm mean. There was no translation from that. But I found the museum, the Reich Museum, to be very revealing. We actually found another artifact there which showed a decapitated six-fingered giant. So what's that about? So once again, we even here, and this was depicted on the pottery, a very large piece of pottery, the decapitation of a very large six-fingered giant, which once again ties us back into what the Native American tribes tell us happened in this country. So here we are in Peru, and we're dealing with the same type of mythos, if I could use that word. So it's just fascinating.
I thought it was. I thought that was the coolest thing I ever saw. In the Trail to Nephilim 1, you went to the church at, I can't even say it,
Waitara?
Yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the church at Waitara, and this is what the Catholics would do. They would go into these ancient sites, and they would build a cathedral or a church on them, which is crazy because these ancient sites were not, well, some of them were places of worship, but we also feel that some of these ancient sites, like we see in Waitara, were far more than what we're given credit to, what the archaeologists and anthropologists tell us they are. What I mean by that, when you go to Atara and you go inside, it's the Catholic Church, and they try to tell us that these little niches in the wall, or these actually large niches in the wall, were used to put the idols that the Inca worship. We say poppycock to that, rubbish. When you go to the exterior of the building, it becomes very clear that there are two different types of stonework. The original site was very complex. The stones are ashlar construction. They are put together without mortar. The interior of the stones, the cutting is absolutely perfect. They fit together perfectly. It has withstood this test of time. And when you look at it from the outside, am I in Egypt or am I in Peru? Where am I? And above that initial layer of stone, which goes up about 8 to 10 feet, above that is then what I call the Inca slop. And that became the basis for the cathedral. All those rocks above are all indigenous, found within the area, and they're all mortared together. The stones below are from a quarry miles away. I don't know how far, 20 miles, 30 miles away from the site, and they are andesite, very hard, and they are, the construction is incredible. And some of these stones, you know, when you're there, Sue, and you actually look at the way they're placed together, you sit there and go, how did they do this? In the Neolithic, with only copper chisels, when copper will not cut andesite, and yet we see that there's no two stones alike. They're polygonal shapes. Sometimes there's curves, just because they can do it. So we're looking at a technology that has been lost to us. And it's funny how the anthropologists will just dismiss this and go, oh, well, they had a technology which was lost to us and we don't know how to duplicate it. Well, isn't that convenient? You mean these people had a technique which we can't duplicate today? And I've shown these pictures to architects and engineers, and they laugh very nervously when they see them because, well, and my question to them is, can we duplicate this today? And they look at me and go, well, we can, but, you know, we've got lasers and diamond saws, and it would be on a time and material basis, and it would take a lot of time to build something like this. And yet, in Peru, we see it everywhere. We see the vestiges of a lost race of people that were there, that had technology that really rivals what we have in modernity. And I just find that incredibly enigmatic and startling and intriguing.
In chapter 12 on the Trail 1, you went to Wakey. The picture on that page is fascinating, of the skull that looks just like an alien. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's called the Waikiki skull.
Oh, sorry.
It's on the way down to the Sacred Valley in this little hole-in-the-wall museum. And Senor Renato was gracious enough to allow us to film, take the plexiglass case off. There was a British film crew that went in, apparently, and did DNA testing on it. This being is about less than 3 feet tall. It's missing 2 ribs. It has a very elongated skull. The fontanelle is still open, yet it's got molars. It's extremely bizarre. We don't know what we're looking at. The DNA evidence that came back, according to the British labs, the mitochondrial DNA came back human, but the nuclear DNA did not fit anything in the genetic profile. In other words, it wasn't Homo sapien, it wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't Denisovan. They were at a loss to discover what this being was. Isn't that interesting? You would think that geneticists and anthropologists from all over the world would be making a beeline down to this place to examine Waikiki for themselves, but they're not interested in that. And of course, we're very interested in that because that goes back to our whole theory that there's an outside agency manipulating the genome to create some sort of a hybrid race. And this ties back into the days of Noah, Genesis 6, Genesis 3, and it also tells us or points to Jesus' own words that tells us it'll be like the days of Noah when he returns. So that points the student of biblical prophecy back to the days of Noah. And what do we see? We see an incursion by the fallen angelic hosts of heaven, which come onto the planet, have sex with the woman, and create this hybrid race known as the Nephilim. And I find that just incredible.
To get off the topic a little bit, with all this weird weather that's happening around with all these big storms. And I mean, where I live in New York, and the weather here is crazy. One day, 2 days ago, it was 80 degrees during the day and it was 40 at night. And yesterday it was 65 during the day and 30 at night. Is this, I mean, is this something that we should worry about? Is this something that's biblically prophesized about? Are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I had my mute button on accidentally. Sorry about that, Sue. The short answer to that is yes. I believe that the weird weather patterns that we're seeing on a global level, is it geoengineering? Are they spraying the skies? Are they affecting it? I believe that yes, they are. I think the chemtrails are doing something with the weather. For instance, out here on Good Friday, they sprayed the heck out of the skies. There was no call for rain in the forecast at all. Several days later on Tuesday, it's raining cats and dogs here in April. Now, that's not normal. They sprayed the heck out of the skies. I mean, there were checkerboard patterns up there. The planes were going all day, back and forth, back and forth. And, why aren't they spraying today? They spray everywhere. I think it's geoengineering. I think they're messing with the weather patterns. California's in a major drought. And I think all of this ties back into ancient biblical prophecies. By all means, we see stuff that's happening, and it's not good. And I'm alarmed at what I see. And look, you look at the earthquakes in diverse places. You look at the record droughts, the record flooding, the record snowfall, the record temperatures. It's just, I think it's unprecedented. There are people that will say we've always had it like this, but then you combine it with the volcanic activity, the tornadoes, and the other weird weather implications. Look at the famines, look at the rise of pestilence, look at the Ebola. Look at the death of AIDS. You never hear anything about AIDS anymore. Millions of people have died in AIDS in Africa, and it's ongoing. Look at the famines that are on the planet. Look at the wars and rumors of wars. Look at the Middle East, which is imploding. I mean, are you kidding me? The collapse of the petrodollar seems to be imminent. As the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, BRICS nations are calling for a new default currency, probably the Chinese yuan. We are living in tenuous times. Look at the racial tension, not only in this country, but in other countries. Look at just a few days ago, a Christian boy was set on fire by two Muslims just because he was Christian. Christian churches are being burned throughout the Middle East. Christians are being beheaded. Lots of persecution, lots of real crazy stuff going on the planet right now with no end in sight.
I live in New York. I'm close to the Finger Lakes here in Canandaigua, and I'll tell you, they spray here
constantly.
Out of 7 days a week, at least 5 days a week, and I'm very aware of what, that they're spraying, and a lot of people don't understand when you bring that up to them. Do you know that they're spraying chemicals up there? And they are not. That's just clouds. And I said, how many times do you see that many paths cross each other, and the stuff that they leave up there just turns into this misty, cloudy, and then all of a sudden it's raining.
Very strange, isn't it? Very strange.
Well, here it's literally at least 5 days a week they're doing it. And I guess my concern is if there's a drought in California and they know they can make it rain when they need to, then I don't know why they're not making it rain when they need to.
Yeah, there you go.
It's silly to me. You talked about the evaluation of 4 elongated skulls. The interesting part to me was how some of them didn't have sutures where they belonged and such. Can you tell us about that? That was fascinating.
Many of the Paraca skulls in Peru do not have a sagittal suture, which splits the parietal plate. The human skull consists of 4 plates: the frontal plate, 2 parietals on either side, and the occipital plate in the rear. Many of the skulls that we see in Peru do not have a sagittal suture. They only have 1 parietal plate instead of the 2 parietal plates that normal skulls will have. Now, there is a disease which can cause the closing of the sagittal suture. We get that. However, most often that disease happens in the elderly. Many of the skulls we look at, and we've had forensic anthropologists as well as dentists look at the dentition. One of the that was in the collection was a female between 18 and 25 years old with only one parietal plate. And that was interesting because she was between 18 and 25 based on the dentition. So the sagittal suture really shouldn't have closed. But what's interesting is and I talk about this in On the Trail Volume 2, there is a lithograph from 1842, because even back then this debate was this idea of cradle headboarding, where they board artificially elongate the skull through binding the head of an infant. That's called cradle headboarding, and shaping the skull was a hot button issue. There were those who in academia who believed that all the skulls were cradle headboarded, and then there were those in the other camp, of which I'm in today, that believed that, yeah, some of these things are cradle headboarded, but not all of them. It seems to be genetic. And what we found, according to this 1842 journal from these two explorers that were down there, complete with a lithograph, was that they found a mummy, and when they opened up the mummy, they found that it was a pregnant woman who was about 7 months pregnant. So they opened that up, and they found a fetus that, of course, was mummified in the womb of this woman that they estimated about 7 months old. It had an elongated skull. Now, you can't elongate a skull, in utero. You just can't do that, and yet it's there. And that points to an outside agency manipulating the genome, which is what our hypothesis is. And look, we're getting bits and pieces that seem to point to the veracity of our hypothesis. Even if we get the DNA evidence, even if we're allowed to get samples out of Peru and we do extensive DNA testing, and it shows us that, okay, you got something which we don't know what it is, that doesn't necessarily point back to the Nephilim. Get what I mean? Yeah. It would seem to vindicate or verify our hypothesis that, okay, it fits the timeline. The carbon dating fits the timeline of about 3,000, 3,500 years ago, and then moving forward from that, when the Nephilim tribes left, their genetics aren't human. Okay, that's another check for us. They look completely different than human beings. Okay, the oral tradition says that they were cannibals, which ties back to the Book of Enoch, but it's not conclusive. In fact, Sue, it'll probably never be conclusive because it's conjecture, and I will readily admit that. However, it seems to point back to the biblical narrative that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. It seems to point back to the veracity of the biblical narrative, because at least we have an explanation as to what these entities are. And guess what? If they are the offspring of angelic beings, then their DNA should be different. Their mitochondrial might be human, but their nuclear DNA, like the Waukee skull, is not human, which again fits our hypothesis. And that points back to the veracity of the biblical narrative.
Huh. I found it fascinating. What would it take for somebody who just wants to go out and actually, visit these places and get to, for somebody to be an archaeologist, I'm sure you have to go through a lot of, permits and schooling and such.
Sure.
But what does it take for somebody who, like me, who would just like to go out there and explore?
Well, it's a state-by-state situation. For instance, out in California, you can't do anything. But in Ohio, if you have a mound on your property, you can dig into it. If it's private property, you can dig into it. If you find human remains, you've got to notify, the sheriff and the coroner, and then NAGPRA and the Native American representative will come out and look at it and all that stuff. Okay, that's fine. But it allows you to dig on your own property. Gee, we actually have some rights in the state of Ohio, but it depends. There are sites all around in upstate New York, all around on the East Coast. I would go to your local museum. and start nosing around there. That's always a good place to start. Go online. You can walk places. For instance, like in Ohio, where our Nephilim Mountains 3 conference will be, the Great Circle Mountain is there, which is a fascinating place just to take a group of people and talk about what was there and look at the way the mound is created, the circle was created. It is a henge. There was a waterway. It's very sophisticated. It took a long time to build this thing, and yet they don't know really who built the Great Circle Mound in Ohio. And this thing is about 1,200 feet in diameter. It is absolutely huge. And some of these mounds are upwards of 20 feet tall. Not all the way around, but the entrance was about, these mounds were around 20 feet tall. And some people believe, as I do, that the head of the serpent was there carved into the mound. Very sophisticated, very, very sophisticated. And by the way, human remains were found on the altar when they did excavations in the center of that henge. So there's a lot of areas in your neck of the woods. You just need to spend some time and go out and begin to probe. Go to some of the areas, look at the artifacts, go to the museums, and discover for yourself that so oftentimes they'll just put up a piece, an artifact, completely out of context and say, "Oh, this was a ceremonial spearhead." Well, you don't know that. You're just making it up. Speaking of what we found one at a museum in Chicago, where they showed a very large Hopewell point found in Ohio and said this must have been ceremonial. Well, you don't know that. You're just making that up. Where was it found? If it was found next to a 9-footer, then it's not ceremonial, it's utilitarian. And this is what's so fascinating about being on the trail, that much of the information has been covered up. Even my recent trip out to Catalina Island, and we talked about this last time, the picture of Ralph Glidden standing in an recently open excavated tomb, and in front of him is a very large giant. Guess what? In the Catalina Museum, they have that picture, but it's cropped. So you see Ralph Glidden standing with a shovel in the grave, but you don't see what he's uncovered in front of you, which of course is the giant skeleton, which we had estimated at about 9 feet tall. You don't see that, which is just incredible.
This is, for me, I'm just interested in, I would love to just get out there and go into these pyramids and go into these dig sites and, just be able to walk there and say that I actually got to be there. That's the fascinating part of this stuff for me.
Well, if we go down to Peru again, we do a Nephilim skull tour. Sign up and join the party. It's absolutely fascinating. If you're into anything like this, archaeology, Peru is a great place. But there's stuff all over the Americas, guaranteed. It might not be as interesting, let's say, as walking in Machongo's graveyard, but the Circle Mound in Ohio is just an amazing place. But there are places all through New York State where there are, ancient artifacts and dolmens and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, I'll have to look into that, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't want to ruin too much more about your books for everybody, but I'll tell you, your books that is the first book in my whole entire life, the two of those books that once you pick them up, you can't put them down.
Wow, I really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Sue. Great.
Well, you have that writing style where you're talking to your readers instead of talking at them.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. That's a nice compliment. Thank you. And if you're interested in getting it, you can go to lamarzulli.net, www.lamarzulli.net, and it's all right there. Avail yourself of these books, and they're oversized, 8.5 by 11, full-color pictures. They're great to sit on the coffee table, great for starting conversations. And, of course, the pictures, and that's why they're oversized, the pictures say everything, in my opinion. And it's just been, thanks so much for the kudos, Sue. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to really thank you for taking your time to come back on with us.
Well, let's do it again real soon. You're a great interviewer, and you do a great show, and you do your homework. So I certainly thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you very much. And everybody that I've talked to that I told them you were coming back on was very excited, and they're very excited to listen to this interview. So
wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, and good luck in your future searches, and hopefully, we can get some more evidence here and prove the Nephilim, prove the whole Nephilim theory.
It'd be great, wouldn't it?
It definitely would, because since I first started listening to you and I actually, understood what you were saying, it all makes so much more sense now.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and you have a great day.
All righty. Thanks, Sue. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, guys, that was an amazing, fascinating interview, and I am so happy to be able to have him back on with us. You definitely, it would be in your best interest to go on his site and get these books. On the Trail of the Nephilim 1 and on the Trail of the Nephilim 2. They were the most fascinating things, and I'm telling you, if you're into this stuff, you will not be able to put them down. That was a great show, and I'm looking forward to having him back on again as well. Well, that's all we have time for today. Well, we post all our shows on YouTube, and if you want to know more about our guests and upcoming shows, just go visit our Info2Rail webpage. You just Google Info2Rail, and you click on our Google Sites page. Also listed on there is our YouTube page. I want to thank you so much for joining us here at Info2Rail each week, and I hope to see you here each and every week. We have a lot of great guests and great interviews coming your way. In the near future here, we'd like to start going live and getting some callers in. So look for that. I'll let you know right before we decide to go live. I'll let you know where we're going to be live and, all the details of that. Well, until then, may God bless you and may He keep you and may His face shine upon you in these uncertain times. We'll see you soon.